Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and yeah, we already talked about the fancy new iPad mini, the fangled new iPhone 13, and the slightly underwhelming Apple Watch Series 7, but you know what? You know what the real star of Apple's September event was? It was the iPad, the regular old iPad. Now I know this iPad doesn't get an exciting new redesign, but it continues to deliver on what I called previous versions of this model as one of the best deals in tech, and even though this device may look exactly the same as the previous generation, Apple actually made some really big improvements to this device, so much so in fact, that I think it might actually be the best value in the entire iPad lineup because realistically, how much iPad do you really need? Now, believe it or not, we have a ton of info to go over regarding this iPad and other iPads in the lineup. So remember to hit the like button if you found this video helpful. And also, while you're listening to this part and you're already here, why don't you just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you're notified when my full iPad review is ready to go in the coming weeks. All right, let's get into this. So first of all, let's go over everything new with this iPad and some important upgrades that Apple has made to this device before we get into some buying advice to figure out if this iPad is right for you or if you should go for another option. So from a design perspective, pretty much everything is the same with this iPad as the previous iPad 8th generation, with one very, very small exception. That exception is that this iPad can now be bought in the silver variant, but the front of the iPad now has black bezels. So that means that right now the iPads with the white front are no more. You can't buy them anymore in that style. That's not really an improvement, but it's just a personal preference thing in terms of looks, and honestly, I actually usually opted to get the white colored front iPads because I like the way they look better, so if anything, this is kind of a downgrade for me. But from a visual and design standpoint, this is just one very, very minor small change on that silver model. And this iPad still looks exactly the same. It still has the top and bottom bezel, so no fancy new redesign, and it still has the regular Touch ID button. And that means the iPad still has the same 10.2-inch Retina display as its predecessor, although this time it does have a true tone display, so it can change the color temperature on the display based on the ambient lighting conditions you're using the iPad in, which means that the screen can get a warmer or cooler color temperature to match the room that you're in. Other than that, the display is unchanged, so it still lacks things like the P3 wide color spectrum, which every other iPad now has, and the display is still not laminated, so there is going to be a slight air gap between the glass and the display panel. Not a deal breaker, but it would have been nice if they could have made the display laminated. Because the design is the same as the older iPad, it still uses all of the same accessories, so it still has the old smart connector placement on the side, meaning you can still hook up to Apple's smart keyboard, and if you wanted to get a trackpad for this iPad, you actually can, and you can turn this into more of a laptop replacement by getting the Logitech Combo Touch keyboard, which has a trackpad attached to it, and you can take full advantage of trackpad support in iPadOS. Because it's the same design, it still has a Lightning port, and if you look at the rest of the iPad lineup, this is the last iPad to keep the Lightning port, as even the iPad mini now has switched over to using USB-C. The reason why Apple is keeping the Lightning port on this model is pretty simple though, and that is because it uses the older design. That also means it can't use the Apple Pencil 2. So it has to be compatible with the first generation Apple Pencil, and the first generation Apple Pencil uses the Lightning port to sync and charge. So Apple was kind of forced to keep it. However, even though this iPad is mostly the same on the outside, Apple has made 3 very important internal changes to this iPad to make it a way better value. First of all, this iPad has a better front-facing camera than the more expensive $600 iPad Air. Yes, you didn't mishear me. The $329 iPad at almost half the price of the current iPad Air has a better front-facing camera. In fact, it's the same 12-megapixel ultra-wide camera that is currently found on Apple's iPad Pro. In fact, the front-facing camera on this iPad is higher quality than its rear 8-megapixel camera, which is just really weird to think about, and even stranger to think that last year, This camera was just a 1.2 megapixel sensor, so this is a huge jump up in quality for the front-facing camera on the standard iPad. But in a way, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because I think the front-facing camera is used more on the iPad than the rear-facing camera, because what are you using the front-facing camera for? You're using it for video calls. And this camera supports Apple's cool new centerstage feature, which will scan and pan to keep you center in the frame as you move about the camera's frame, or it can adjust to a wider angle field of view if other people are also in the video call. So yes, the regular iPad finally has a good front-facing camera, and in fact, it's one of the best front-facing cameras on any iPad. The second addition is the new chip change, which now bumps up the A12 chip from the 8th generation iPad to an A13 chip. Early reports say that this A13 chip still has 3 gigabytes of memory, but in terms of CPU improvements, this makes the iPad on par with the iPhone 11, and for an entry-level $329 iPad, this chip is powerful enough to do video editing, photo editing, and use drawing programs with the Apple Pencil, as well as play games on it at higher graphics settings. And anything, really. Basically, the iPad can pretty much handle anything an iPad can do, and it's really just one chip generation behind the iPad Air, which is, again, double the price of this iPad. Lastly, and I think honestly most importantly, Apple has now doubled the storage of this entry-level iPad, making it 64 gigabytes for the entry-level model instead of just 32 gigabytes. That makes it a way better value. In fact, I think this is the most important change that Apple has made to this iPad to make it one of the first iPads you should look at. And that's because before I would have to constantly recommend that when people were looking at purchasing the base iPad, that you probably might not be able to get by on the small 32 gigabytes of storage. It was really a small amount of storage for an iPad. And I think that most users would probably be better off paying for more storage, which back then was an additional $100 upgrade. This time though, although 64 gigabytes isn't like a huge storage amount by any means, it also isn't an anemic storage amount. And I think a lot of people, especially the target audience for this iPad, will totally be fine with just the entry-level 64 gigabyte model and still have enough room to store a few movies, games, music, photos, and all of the apps you want to use. With that being said, let's talk buying advice, because like I just mentioned, this 64 gigabyte model at $329 is a stellar value. And based on what I know about using the previous 10.2-inch iPad, even though I don't have this iPad yet into review, I can make a lot of fair assumptions, because this is basically the same design, just with upgraded storage, an upgraded camera, and the upgraded powerful A13 chip. So taking all that into consideration, I can only assume that this iPad is just going to be a high recommendation for me, because it has all the specs you really need to care about. Now, if you want more storage, your only option is a pricey $150 upgrade, but that upgrade does get you 4 times the amount of storage with a new 256 gigabyte option, and that is still less money than the new iPad mini or the iPad Air. So hey, if you like the specs of this iPad, if you think it's gonna be fine for you, and maybe you want this older design that actually could be a selling point if you like the home button, or if you want a headphone jack, this iPad with both storage options is honestly still a good buy. Now, the only upgrade I would be very hesitant on making is the cellular upgrade. It is very, very pricey to outfit any iPad with additional cellular connectivity, which is usually why I skip it. And adding it to this iPad is a $130 upgrade. That really does start to chip away at the great value of this iPad being at $329. And I think for most people, the better option would just be to use your existing cell phone as a hotspot for situations where you can't access internet through a Wi-Fi connection. So if you already have a hotspot feature on your iPhone through your cellular plan, I would say that's probably the better option than getting a separate cellular version of the iPad, which again is going to be a lot of money. As for accessories, well, the first generation Apple Pencil isn't as nice as the second generation, but hey, listen, it gets the job done, and it is very accurate as a stylus for using for either drawing or writing. Instead of Apple's Smart Keyboard cover, I would actually recommend checking out Logitech's Combo Touch Keyboard, which offers a better typing experience and has a trackpad built into it, and it's around the same price as Apple's version, which again lacks a trackpad. The only negative with the Logitech keyboard is that it's a little bulkier and heavier, but anyway, either keyboard you get will turn the iPad into more of a kind of laptop replacement if you're fine with iPadOS over something like macOS or Windows, and I still think the iPad is a much better solution than a lot of the cheaper Chromebooks out there. Speaking of which, this iPad gets the same version of iPadOS as any of the other iPads, so software-wise, you're getting the same exact software experience as the more expensive iPad Air or iPad Pro, even all the way up to that $1,100 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which begs the question, while this new iPad may not look as nice as newer iPads, it appears it really can do pretty much exactly what the other iPads can do at a way lower price point. But listen, I know a lot of people might be tempted by the other version, so are there legitimate reasons to buy an iPad or the more expensive iPads over this one? Yes, I think there is. But first, let's talk about the bigger iPads. I know most people would probably jump up to the iPad mini as their next option, but I think that's a separate audience, but we'll address that at the end. Okay, so the next logical step up from this iPad, I think, is the iPad Air. And again, that's nearly double the price at $600 for the same 64 gigabytes of starting storage. Now, the Air is slightly stronger with its A14 chip, but again, that's only one chip generation ahead of this new iPad, and probably not a reason to pick it over the regular iPad. It also does get 1 gigabyte more of memory, so it should be slightly better at keeping apps open in the background. The main reason you'll want to go for the Air over the regular iPad is probably for the new design and the second generation Apple support if you're a big Apple Pencil user. But in terms of functionality, the biggest difference for the iPad Air I really don't think is the design. Like, it's nice, but it's not all the end all be all. I think it's actually the Magic Keyboard support, which is the best way to make your iPad more of a laptop replacement. Especially with its USB-C port, the iPad Air offers much faster physical data transfer rates if you're still using physical, media, like a external hard drive. However, that keyboard is nice, but it's still $300, which is almost the same price as just buying the regular iPad. Furthermore, the iPad mini is now stronger than the iPad Air, and the iPad Air doesn't even have the new centerstage camera found on every other iPad. So honestly, right now, the iPad Air is nice, but if you start to add up its features and its price, I think it's the worst valued iPad right now in the entire lineup, and that really does make it hard to recommend. Strangely enough, the iPad Pro, the 11-inch version, is easier to recommend despite being $200 more than the iPad Air. And that's because it has a lot of advantages, like coming with 128 gigabytes of storage as standard, so the entry-level model is totally serviceable and a much better laptop replacement. Secondly, it gets a lot more power with that new M1 chip and has 8 gigabytes of memory for RAM in the lower storage models and 16 gigabytes of memory in the 1 terabyte or higher storage models. It also has a faster 120 Hz display, which makes animation smoother, enables high frame rate gaming, and is a practical benefit to anyone using the Apple Pencil because it makes the Apple Pencil actually work at a lower latency. However, that iPad Pro, let's be honest, it's still expensive. It's $800. And while the specs make it a better value than the Air, the only people who should buy the iPad Pro, in my opinion, are people who are using this for professional work or those who are choosing this as their main laptop and not as a secondary device. That goes even more so for the iPad Pro 12.9-inch, which starts at $1,099. That's $100 more than Apple's MacBook Air. This iPad does have advantages over the 11-inch because it does have a bigger 12.9-inch display, which is better for multitasking. And it also has better display technology with a new mini LED display, which really does shine when watching HDR movies. But this iPad is pricey, like very, very pricey. I really, again, only recommend this version especially if you're using it as a main computer, you're really using it for like professional drawing or photo and video editing. If you want a bigger display than the 11-inch model, I think it's still worth it. Just be aware, it's pricey. Finally, let's talk about the Mini. The new iPad Mini is also a very attractive iPad, but I think it serves a different market than any of these other iPads, quite frankly, because this iPad is for people who want a smaller iPad with a premium design. It really only shines as a tablet, and unlike any of the other iPads, I don't think it's suitable as a laptop replacement because of its smaller 8.3-inch display, and it lacks a smart connector for attaching a physical full-size keyboard to. Although, to be fair, you could use a full-size Bluetooth keyboard pretty easily with this iPad mini. But either way, I think the Mini is definitely designed to be used more as a tablet than any sort of laptop replacement. And hey, if you want a smaller tablet than the regular iPad, this is the one to get. Like, I'm not knocking the iPad mini. I'm getting one. I'm excited for it. I just think it serves a different role than any of the other iPads that Apple currently sells. All right, everyone, I hope this video was helpful in helping you decide if the regular iPad was right for you or if you should go with another option. And you can actually order the iPad right now through my affiliate link in the description below if you want to help the channel out. Or hey, if you think another iPad is better suited for you, I'll have links to every single iPad in Apple's lineup in the description below, as well as to some recommended accessories. Don't forget, if you like this video and you found it helpful, well, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more, including the full iPad review, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.